Good morning and welcome to the 1 to 10 podcast with 110 Associates. The purpose behind this podcast was to speak with many people within the CFO, COO community within the fund space in London and get their take on not only their journeys within their own careers, but also get their advice and insight into, I guess, how they've got there and how they would perhaps guide others seeking to follow the same pathway. I am really pleased, genuinely delighted to have with me today Rebecca Noyes, who is CFO at Alderwood Capital, which I'll let Rebecca explain a bit more about the business and herself, obviously. But Rebecca, thank you so much for taking part and thank you for your time. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. You're more than welcome.
Good, no, pleasure to have you. And I don't want to make too much of a big deal out of this, but for us, obviously, being on the kind of cold face of recruitment, I guess, you know, the whole topic of diversity is very much kind of, you know, prominent at the moment, and not to kind of place too much pressure on yourself, but you are the first female CFO that's put their hand up to take part. So thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm honored.
Good stuff. So Rebecca, as you know, we've already kind of discussed the I guess the structure or the concept behind it. So if we kick off with, I guess the first part to our conversation will be about your past, and if you don't mind introducing yourself in a bit more detail and explaining, I guess, how your path to CFO came about, and I guess, was it something that you always aspired to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CFO at a firm called Alderwood Capital, and we are a GP stakes investor. And that predominantly means that we invest in other asset management companies. And my background has been working in finance throughout my whole career within asset management. So I am perhaps a little unusual in that I didn't train in practice. I've always been in industry. But I think that is, it brings a different skill set, right? You learn on hand, you're doing things from the ground upwards.
Yep.
And it brings a different experience. Did I always want to be a CFO? No, I didn't. Age, 6, 7, 8, whatever. I never thought, oh, mommy, daddy, yeah, absolutely want to be a CFO. That wasn't me. But I definitely wanted to be a professional. I knew that I wanted to be this career woman. I was very lucky that I grew up in a family where all the women worked. So it was just a matter of fact to me that you would go off and be a career woman. It was never a question that you wouldn't be. And I look back on that and I think seeing that as an example meant I didn't have any limiting beliefs. So I think that was fundamental. I was always taught, like, you go for the next promotion, you keep driving, you keep working. And that, I think, instilled in me, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? You keep pushing. And then I think sort of coming from that background and being lucky enough to be somehow taught and take away from my school and from my family, you can go do anything back, like just work hard and you'll get there. That I went into a really great team when I sort of did my work experience and came out of university. And I had these amazing mentors in my first job. I had this super supportive team. They wanted me to do well. They taught me everything I needed to know. And they were incredibly encouraging as a young individual coming into the workplace. Then that sets you up great for the future.
Yep. And I guess and we can come to this maybe a bit later, but the whole concept of pushing and seeking to always kind of, not necessarily settling or just stopping where you are, whilst that's kind of served you well to date, it was interesting. I had a conversation recently with another CFO, and I think one of his biggest frustrations was with regards to the team under him. he said, no one ever wants to stand still anymore. No one ever wants to kind of be patient and bide their time. Everyone's in a rush to get to where they are. And not to suggest that you've rushed to get to where you are, because you've certainly put in the time to earn your stripes and so on. But would you say that there is a balancing act at the same time required to not always be pushing and seeking that kind of next promotion too quickly?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I was not the person who was managing their career left, right, and center.
Yeah.
I have had 2 jobs in my time, and I have done, like a long time working for the same people. And I think you can't rush gaining experience.
Yeah.
So it's right to be, I think it's right to be ambitious in the sense that you're looking for a new challenge and how can I be better at the role? It's not necessarily being a year in and then what's the next promotion? It's about being ambitious to gain the experience that you need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess for our listeners, just to kind of explain a bit of background, I guess Rebecca is quite a rare example of someone who has developed and progressed, but almost done it with, as you said, you've had two jobs, but a lot of your progression was at the previous firm. But at the same time, you're someone who you've never had to rely on a recruitment agent, right? You've always been kind of, I guess, identified and tapped up based on your performance, which is, well, I guess kudos to you for that. And I just wanted to make a point, because you're probably too humble to say it yourself, but even with the gig at Alderwood, it was through your contacts at your previous firm that people kind of recommended you and put you in the frame for it. So
yeah, absolutely. So for me, my network has been instrumental in my career. It has been taking opportunities. Like, you have to say yes to opportunities. Like, you need to grab them. You don't know what experience you will learn from it. And I think it's the network that you create, but you have to be careful, right? Because if you do a bad job, that network will remember you for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
So you've got to grab the opportunities, but you've got to embrace people. And I think if you do those things, your network will almost create itself. And I used to hate it when you'd go to these events and they'd say, oh, your network. And I hate networking, as I'm sure most accountants do. But actually, it's your network that you will rely on later and later in your career, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess in becoming a CFO in your current role, what do you feel were the biggest challenge that you faced when you became that CFO?
It's an interesting one. That I think there's a real step up in that role. And for me, one of the biggest things is learning to let go of the detail. Like, you have to be able to move to a strategic view, which means you go from being generally in quite a specialized role, and you need to become broader. And you have to therefore let go of some of this detail and delegate that or outsource it, or however your team is set up, to give yourself the breathing room to take that strategic view. And I think, in accountancy, that's quite hard for someone to let go of detail. Generally, people are quite control freaks as accountants. It's got to be correct, so you like everything in its right place. So that's a big challenge. I would say for me, it was also having the self-confidence to believe I could do the role. And I would say, people say this generically of women, and personally, it certainly rung true for me, that women like to tick every box on a job application before they'll go for the promotion.
Yep.
And I think that was something I struggled with and needed to appreciate, that I should push myself and that I should see it as a learning experience, and not to be scared because there was one thing on the list of 10 I couldn't do. Yeah.
That's certainly, I think that there's a lot been said about that, but we certainly see it in our job, where you know, if you're approaching a male candidate, a lot of the time they might not tick every box, but they're almost backing themselves, right? Like, oh, I don't know that, but I'll pick it up. Whereas I think female candidates are more likely to be, actually, I'm not quite sure about this, or I've not done this before, therefore I'm perhaps not the right person for this role.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what's important is to recognize that and to know that about yourself, and to know that those are the other kind of candidates you're going to be against. So if you recognize that and you know that, then you can push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's just about being armed with the information.
Yeah. And have you found, not trying to embarrass you here, but as a young CFO, you know, quite often, and I've had to deliver feedback in the past where it's absolutely loved you, but perhaps you're just not grey enough, right? And
yeah,
have you found that has had a kind of played to your advantage, or has it been a challenge, the fact that you're stepping into this role and having to command that respect across the firm, but also externally with investors, etc.? Has that been part of your challenge, would you say, to, you know, showing that you've got the confidence and ability to do the role despite being young?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would have had a lot, my perception is that I would have found it a lot harder had I not utilized my network. So if I had been going to recruiters and saying, you know, 6 months ago, I want a CFO role, I think, you know, some people would have just laughed me out of the room. And I think because the perception is you have to be 10 to 15 years post-qualified, you have to be a certain age, you have to have that gravitas. And I think actually what you need is experience. And provided you have that experience, your age should be irrelevant.
Absolutely.
But the two are often confused as the same thing. And, you know, you have to have some sort of screening criteria, but I would argue strongly that it should be the experience, not the number of years.
Yeah, agreed.
And
I think gravitas as well, the point you raised, it's almost assumed with age, whereas it's not always the case, right? You can meet someone who's 2 or 3 years post-qualified and they've arguably got more presence and gravitas than people that are.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, gravitas is important. I think that comes with experience. It comes with confidence. So, you know, working on those skill sets, I think, helps people. To be clear, I don't think I've been held back because of my age, but I do think I have relied on my network, which was people who knew my experience. They knew that I was capable of doing the job and therefore were happy to offer me that role. I'm not sure I would get the same, prior to this, I'm not sure I'd have got the same feedback from an external that didn't know me so well. Yeah.
But again, that's, I guess it's proof that, so those who know you and have worked with you value you and recognize that you're ready, if that makes sense. And
absolutely.
I always say to people that there's no bigger compliment than that, right? It's, if your ex-boss would rehire you, that for me speaks volumes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why, and I know I've sort of labored this point so far, but that's why I think your network is so important. Because they are the people that will champion you to other people. So, you know, if you're trying to get a role elsewhere, but your ex-boss knows them and they say, no, actually, you know what, she's a fantastic FC, like she'd make a great FD for you, then that's what you want. You want the people who are going to sponsor you, are going to champion you, who are going to be happy to call their contacts to find you a role, because you know that's ultimately what you want.
Absolutely. So we're going to just move a bit forward now, because we've kind of touched on the background, but in terms of the present day, Rebecca, I guess in your current role, what do you feel have been, I guess, the most important, so the 3 most important skills that you feel you've kind of lent on or utilized, excuse me, in your current role?
Okay, so I would say number 1 is to keep the plate spinning. So you have to be able to take this helicopter view, but go down to the detail, back up to the strategic level. You have to, we're a very small team at Alderwood, so I have to be able to do the little things as well as the big things.
Yep.
So you have to be organized, you have to be in control, and you can only do that sort of zooming in and out if you know that everything else is ticking along and is doing nicely. So for me, that's really important, and that just requires a lot of organization, control processes, in being diligent, ensuring everything can run smoothly and take care of itself.
Yep.
I think what I would say is being a working mum probably helps that. Like, I have had to learn those skills along the way, as well as in like my personal life and professional life. So I think that helps. I think the other skill is, as a CFO, you're like this trusted counsel, you're this advisor to the business, you're there to safeguard the assets. So I have to be patient and thoughtful and give myself the time to make a reasoned, thorough decision. And I think that giving myself that patience and not rushing in is a skill that I really have to utilize, because we've had this discussion before where I said you don't want a CFO that shoots from the hip, because to me it needs to be, it's imperative that the advice you're giving is correct.
Yeah.
And it's not about giving that advice fast. It's about giving a really thoughtful piece of guidance. And then the third thing I would say is actually being able to make a decision. You have to give guidance. You have to come down on a side and say, okay, this is what I believe. So those for me, I'd say, are the three skills. Keeping everything going at once, for sure, being patient with myself and with the process, but to ultimately making decisions that can help people.
Yeah. Brilliant. And I guess my next question was about challenges faced on a daily basis, but you've kind of touched on some of those already. But in terms of, I guess, when you reflect on the past, have there been certain failures or challenges that you've experienced that have helped to shape you for the role you're in?
Oh, for sure. I always think the challenges are what make you, or the failures are what make you, not like you don't really remember the times you did something well, you always remember the times you did something bad. So I'd say my challenges are learning how to say no to people. Like, you're there to guard resources, so you have to work out how you say to people, sorry, you can't do that, or no, but maintain your relationship. It's that balance that you have to strike as a CFO. I think failures absolutely along the way have shaped me. The one that still to this day I'm like, oh, I can't believe that ever happened, it was so awful. I was presenting our group sort of consolidated financial statements to the chairman of our board, and we used to do this thing where we would have like hour-long walkthroughs with each of our board members, so that they could really go into it and ask us any questions that were on their minds. And I was presenting to our chairman, and he was an accountant by background, and it was like the first time I was going to do it by myself, and I was like really excited for it. And he spotted a transposition on the balance sheet and called me out on it, asked me about it. Was very kind, but it was mortifying. Like, I've never been so embarrassed, and I was just thrown and mortified. And to this day, I will not let a set of accounts go out unless I have personally cast them more than 3 times, because it's that attention to detail. And it was going through that it was obviously harmless in the sense that it was picked up, it was corrected, nothing happened from it. But I was so mortified that someone had found this mistake that I'd made, and I was responsible for that. Attention to detail, absolutely key.
Brilliant. No, and I guess again, reflection on your own standards, right? The fact that it's stayed with you to this day.
I think I will go to my grave like reliving that moment. Like, absolutely.
I'm guessing it was probably early in your career, right? So you've kind of been given the chance to go and present to these people, and you want to kind of get it right, and it's
and it's just shockingly wrong. Yes.
And I know you and I have discussed this many a time, and certainly very passionate about not just what you do, but also the company that you work for. But what would you say you love most about your role and the company? And I already know, but for
so the company is easy. I adore the team. Like, we have this fantastic culture. We allow each other to flourish. We're a great team. We work well together, and we've known each other a long time. And I couldn't ask for a more supportive team. You know, it really is an environment where we are there to champion one another. You know, they're all experts in their relevant fields, and I feel like we're a good blend, but we're there to encourage rather than to bring anyone down. So that's really important to me. With my role, I love the structure. Like, I'm an accountant through and through. Like, structure, rules, that's where I work best. So, you know, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Would you say, though, that some of the most rewarding times in your career have perhaps been when the structure's not there? So when you're kind of thrown in at the deep end, you know, tasked with something that you're not sure of, or, you know, that you've not seen before. Does that, in that kind of situation, I feel like a lot of CFOs kind of thrive in that kind of environment. Would you say you're the same, or are you very much a creature of the structure and order that you enjoy?
It's interesting, actually. I really enjoy the part of my role that is creative. So if you take a blank piece of paper and you say, okay, let's create a structure, or let's create a remuneration plan, like, how are we going to do it? And let's start from blank sheet. Absolutely love that. I find it very creative, but it's creative in the sense that there are always rules to be followed. So it's, you know what jurisdiction you're working in, or you know what regulation you're working in. And so I think, for me, that's probably as creative as it gets.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Well, I guess the same goes with everyone, right? The things like jurisdiction, regulation, it's always in the background, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned team and how wonderful the people that you work with are. I guess if you are then looking to bring someone else into that dynamic, are there certain traits or characteristics that you ideally look for? And yes, this is the recruitment part of the talk, so sorry.
And to be fair, I'm super passionate about it, because I think in our industry, in asset management, it's all about people. So actually, recruitment and hiring the right people is so important, because it's a people business, and you have to protect that team and that culture, because that's what you're buying, that's the asset. So there are, one, I'd say attitude. It has to be, in a small firm like us, they have to be a team player, they have to roll their sleeves up, to be reliable, dependable. That's all about their attitude. And you can't teach that to someone. Like, it's either the way they approach their working life, or it isn't. And I think that's number one. Number two, if I'm hiring an accountant, they have to have good attention to detail. You know, we are in a highly regulated industry. Mistakes are costly and hugely detrimental to any business. So attention to detail is paramount. And then the third thing is a bit of a weird one. I would say I have to get the impression that they are willing to continuously learn. We are in an ever-changing industry. You know, it is constantly evolving, new regulations, new accounting standards all the time. And you have to be someone that's willing to learn that, to go with that process, to, you know, the technological advances that we're seeing in accounting. You've got to be someone who's willing to adapt to that and learn that. And I think that if someone isn't willing to continuously learn, how will they adapt with the business as it evolves? How will they help the business grow? But also it's like a humility and humble part of someone's personality. And I think there's always a fine line between sort of confidence and arrogance.
Mhm.
And I think that, seeing how someone continuously adapts can help you decipher that. So those would be my 3 skills: attitude, attention to detail, and continuously improving.
Perfect. Thank you. And I guess if we then look at yourself prior to Alderwood, so you were kind of a financial controller or deputy assistant to the CFO. For people in that seat who, and when we see a lot, right, kind of controller level candidates who are itching to make that step up, some of them are ready, some of them aren't quite there, but for people in those seats, what advice would you give to them in terms of, are there areas that they should be looking to develop independently, or are there skills that they need to ensure they brush up on before putting themselves in that position of CFO?
Yeah. The advice I would give is it's not just about the numbers. So you need to go, we mentioned this earlier about being probably in a relatively siloed role to something that is much, much broader. And so I think you need to identify where you need to broaden your experience. And so for me, this was a case of, coming back, I'd come back from these conferences and I'd say to my immediate boss, my CFO, who was a fantastic mentor throughout the entirety of my career thus far, and our head of HR, I want to progress, I want to make these steps. And they would help me identify like either short secondments or projects that I could get involved in to give me that breadth of experience. So for me, my background was sort of in the corporate side of finance, sort of very traditional finance controller role.
Yep.
And I needed more fund experience. I needed more fund controller experience. So I would get seconded in to some of our managers to give me that experience, to work on cutting NAVs, to work on understanding, what does the administrator do? What does the depository do? And all these things that I didn't previously have any interaction with. So I think you identify those areas, also look at CFO roles that are on the market. And I think this is a great tip actually for any role. And you look at what the job spec is asking and you say, okay, can I do these things? Where don't I have anything like any experience? And how do I go about getting that? And I think that's about asking to be involved in projects. It's about potentially making like a sideways move to get you that experience. It's not always a straight up move.
Yeah.
I also think it's about thinking about things outside of your professional sphere. So, I was once at a conference and they were talking about doing non-exec roles. And they said you should look if you want to be a non-exec in the financial sector, you could look at doing something in the not-for-profit sector first. Or you could look at doing like government non-exec roles, because they're often looking for people from industry to come and advise on these boards. And I think so widen the sphere that you're looking in. I would say. And I think the other place you can look is professional groups. So like go on conferences, like go to various events that you think might give you seminars or interesting topics that you can learn from.
Brilliant. No, well, the NED point I really find interesting because it's something that I've certainly not in previous discussions on not just on this podcast series, but just generally, it's never really come up. But now that you say it definitely makes sense in terms of it may not be the exact sector, it may not be asset management, for instance, but going in and being able to operate at that kind of level and demonstrate utilizing your skills, but demonstrating your ability to operate in that kind of capacity would certainly add to anyone's I guess resume as it were. Exactly.
Like it will be helpful on your CV, and you get the experience of being on a board and seeing how that operates, and all of that helps. It's not going to be detrimental. Obviously, you have to weigh up your time commitments and ensure you do it diligently and to the best of your ability. But you know, it's thinking broader and outside of your immediate sphere, I would say.
Yeah. And for yourself, Rebecca, like on a personal note, you've obviously mentioned things like conferences and your network, but for your own self-development, are there certain things that you kind of tap into or rely on, you know, whether it's books, or seminars, etc.? How do you manage that part of your own career?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in self-development, and I think you sometimes make the mistake of focusing purely on your professional side and less on your sort of personal skills and your like self-confidence and presentation skills and those softer skills. And look, I am an introverted accountant. The thought of going on like a course where I have to role play with the stranger next to me is just but I think you pick the thing that works for you. People get an awful lot of value out of that stuff, and I do really subscribe to it. I like to watch. I like to be the person in the audience watching that. So I love to go on like conferences. I love reading self-development books. Like on holiday, I devour them. My husband always complains about how many books I bring on holiday. And I think it's you find the thing that ignites the passion in you to want to do it. And I think if you can do that, then great.
No, definitely. Great. Right. So we're now looking into the future. I should get some crystal ball thing.
Yeah, exactly. As a lottery ticket.
Yeah. But in terms of, so for yourself and the Alderwood business, I guess, what do you view as the key areas of development or skill sets that you guys will be requiring in the next kind of 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, it's so we are fundraising. So our focus will entirely on the next 6 months be on fundraising. And then we'll launch our fund, and then we will be into implementation operations mode. So whilst we are doing a lot of that work prior to fund launch now, it will be really following that through project management. All of those skills will be, you know, top priority for us, and deploying the capital that we'll have raised. So a busy time for us.
Yep, brilliant. And for yourself personally, I guess within that same period, or even beyond that, and I say beyond because I know I know your feelings on it, right? So it's quite refreshing to hear that. So I kind of I want to make it clear this is kind of not just 12, 24 months, but beyond that, I guess, where do you see yourself? Where would you like to be?
Yeah, so we've talked about this. I think, you know, the last time you asked, it was like, where do you want to be in 3 years' time? In 3 years' time, we'll be deploying the capital that we've raised. So I will be, you know, within the same team, very happily. They're deployed. It will be halfway through our investment period. So we should have deployed a chunk of capital, be deploying the rest. I'll be establishing relationships with the finance teams and the businesses that we're partnering with. And that is a huge part of my role that I really enjoy. Like, I love, you know, creating these trusting, open relationships with finance teams that, you know, at the moment are unknown to me, but you get this great network of finance individuals. You learn from each other. You know, it's a real part of the job that I enjoy. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Brilliant.
And then, and again, I think we touched upon part of this, but and if you don't mind me saying, I just want to explain a bit about your story, Rebecca, because you've not mentioned it, but obviously you took on work experience while being a student, and on the back of that work experience were then offered your first job, which allowed you to train as an accountant, and you've never really looked back from there, right? So I know you kind of brushed over it with the whole, I didn't train in audit, but just to give the listeners some context. So if you were now sat next to Rebecca, student Rebecca, shall we say, that was about to embark on her career as an accountant, what 3 pieces of advice would you give her?
That's interesting. It's interesting, like the way you frame it, because part of me is like, oh, I didn't train in audit. Like, did I do myself a disservice? And would I go back and say, that's the route you should take. But actually, I don't think I'd be the person I am today if I had. Like, I think learning by doing has really stood me well. And it's the way my brain works. So, my degree was in physics. So I learned by breaking things down into their smallest constituent parts and building it back up again. And I think that's why for me, learning by doing the bookkeeping, by paying the water bills, by then manually doing the consolidations, I understand the detail of how that stuff works to be able to take the strategic view.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a balance to be had in your finance teams. I think people who trained in audit bring an awful lot of technical skills, a lot of analytical and managerial skills. And I think you have to have that balance of people that can do and people that can review. So it's a balancing act for sure. What 3 pieces of advice? I would tell myself, be patient. Like we talked about this, don't you can't rush gaining experience. So be patient with yourself, like absorb it and allow that process to take the time it needs to take. So definitely be patient. Learn to listen would be a big one for me. I was definitely guilty of thinking I'd heard the question, but actually I was answering a completely different one to what had been said in the room. So learning to listen for sure. And the third one would be being more confident in your ability, but I don't mean that in a like being more self-confident. I think it was probably about 5 years ago that I had this turning point where I stopped getting super nervous talking to very senior members of staff. And something, well, I can tell you, it was one of the partners at Alderwood, our head of HR, had this discussion with her. We had this really long chat. And in my head, it flipped it from suddenly, I don't need to be nervous in front of these people. What I need to do is view it as an opportunity to learn from them and enjoy the time that I spend with them. Don't be scared of it. And actually just absorb being in that room with them and see what questions they're asking, rather than being worried, oh, what if I'm underprepared? And what if they ask me things that I don't know? Use it as an experience to say, okay, they asked me this, this, and this. So next time I know these are the kinds of questions that this senior level is going to ask me. So I think it's like that flip from being scared and nervous to being confident and use it as a positive to go forward with. And that really helped me. And I think that's what I would say to my younger self. Just take the opportunities, grab them with both hands and absorb from it everything you can.
Yeah. I think that, well, I know in the past when you and I have spoken, one of the things that you've always been a big kind of sponsor of is always saying yes, right? Especially when you're developing in your career and just embracing challenges and taking them on and not shying away from them, which then overlaps with the confidence piece. And just to be clear, I wasn't saying that. I wasn't suggesting any less of you because you had
no.
path. It was
but I didn't want to. I loved the route that I took. It was fantastic for me, but I also recognize it's not like the traditional
it's funny though, because the biggest thing we have now is, if you look at kind of roles at that newly qualified level, the clients have always been very big on, I think when I first got into recruitment, it was always big four auditors, and now I think more and more clients see the value in kind of mid-tier practice firms where candidates aren't just auditing, but they're actually involved in accounting. But for us at the moment, the biggest challenge is getting these audit candidates to want to continue with roles in accounting, because they all want to go on and do different things. So
I remember when the mentor I've had throughout my career, who was the CFO at my last firm, I remember when I was aged 18 and I'd done like a summer of work experience with him, and I was going off to uni, and he was saying to me, okay, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And I was like, oh, I'm going to go off and be an investment person. Like, that's what I want to be. And he was like, oh, okay, great. And he said to me, well, just remember that accountants have jobs in good times and in bad. So like it will stand you in good stead. And coming out of uni, it was the financial crisis. And I remember my parents just saying to me, like, no, you, like, go and be an accountant. Like, this is when, like, it's hard to get jobs, go and be an accountant. And actually, you know what, they were all completely right. Like, it completely aligns with the way my brain works, the way I like to work. You know, they knew me better than I knew myself at that age.
Order and structure,
organization. Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything has its place, but you know, you wouldn't expect anything less from someone who's done maths and physics their whole life. Like, I'm a numbers person through and through.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, look, we're kind of reaching the end now, Rebecca. So, like, firstly, I just wanted to thank you again. It's been super insightful. It's also been very kind of interesting to get your take on things and your perspective. Were there any areas that you feel that you wanted to cover in a bit more detail, or do you feel like we've kind of covered some of the points as much as you would like?
I think like my key message to people would be just like, honestly, say yes to every opportunity. You'll figure out how to do it. Like, just say yes. What's the worst that can happen? You know, you can work it out. Really utilize your network. Like, you know, you need buy-in from them. You need people to see that you're good, that you're diligent, but also learn from them. Like, absorb as much as you can. And I think if you do those things, you know, your career will kind of pave its way for you. You've just got to keep chugging away at it. Brilliant.
Words of wisdom. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for taking part, and appreciate your time. And hopefully the listeners will get value from your experiences and your insight as well.
Wonderful. Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I'll speak to you soon.
Speak soon. Take care. Bye-bye.